They were called the scrolling generation, glued to screen, drowning in memes and reels. But in Nepal, Gen Z flipped the script. They took their frustration with unemployment, corruption, and inequality off the timelines and onto the streets. What began as hashtags turned into history as young people led one of the most dramatic uprisings the country had seen in decades. But to understand why this generation rose with such a fury, we need to trace Nepal's long journey of broken promises, a journey that began with First People's Movement in 1990. In 1990, the Jana Andolan movement in Nepal ended King Birendra's absolute rule and established a constitutional monarchy with a multi-party parliament. This meant the king became a ceremonial figurehead and the governing power was transferred to an elected prime minister and a parliament. However, the subsequent failure of the new democratic government to address deep-rooted poverty, corruption and social inequality led the Communist Party of Nepal, under the leadership of Pushpa Kamal Dahal, popularly known as Prachanda, to launch a violent insurgency in 1996 aimed at toppling the monarchy. As the conflict escalated, an unexpected tragedy occurred with the massacre of Royal Family that killed King Birendra in June 2001, bringing his brother, King Gyanendra, to the throne. But this did not stop the insurgency, which only escalated after the collapse of the ceasefire agreement in November 2001. The new king, frustrated by the Maoists, suspended the constitution, citing failure of the elected leader to control the insurgency, dismissed the government and imposed emergency rule. This sparked outrage among the people. In 2006, a mass pro-democracy movement, Loktantra Andolan, led by the seven-party alliance, including the Nepali Congress, UML faction of the Communists, and other parties, along with Maoists, mobilized a nationwide protest demanding an end to the monarchy and restoration of democracy. Under pressure, King reinstated parliament, leading to a peace deal with the Maoists and the formal abolition of the monarchy. Thus, on 28 May 2008, a new Constituent Assembly was elected and declared Nepal a federal democratic republic. In this election, the Communist Maoist faction, made of former insurgents, won 220 seats out of 575 seats, followed by Nepali Congress, which won 110 seats, and the mainstream leftist Communist UML faction with 103 seats. The Constituent Assembly was tasked with two main objectives. First was the drafting of a new constitution that would serve as the foundation of governance, and second, serving as the interim legislators for a period of 2 years. But within a short period, the assembly began facing serious challenges. The deep ideological divisions between the political parties over several topics prevented any progress in drafting the constitution. The Maoist and ethnic parties pushed for ethnic federalism, proposing provinces named after dominant groups like Taru or Limbu to empower historically excluded communities. Nepali Congress and UML opposed this, fearing it would deepen ethnic divides and threaten national unity. They instead proposed geographic federalism, where provinces would be named based on their location and practicality. Other major points of disagreement were the form of government and national identity. The Maoists pushed for a presidential system to centralize power and drive reforms, while the Nepali Congress and UML backed a parliamentary model. Beyond ideological divides, the Constituent Assembly's work was repeatedly disrupted by a relentless game of musical chairs in leadership. Between April 2008 and May 2012, Nepal saw 5 prime ministers. Girja Prasad Koirala stepped down as prime minister in August 2008 after the Constituent Assembly election in May, followed by Prachanda from Maoist Party, which had the majority seats. However, he resigned in May 2009 after a failed attempt to dismiss the army chief over integrating Maoist fighters into Nepalese army. Madhav Kumar Nepal succeeded him but resigned in June 2010 amid stalled progress. Jhalanath Kamal took office in after 16 rounds of voting and more than 7 months of deadlock, with Maoist party support, only to step down 6 months later due to internal discord. Baburam Bhattarai became prime minister in August 2011 and made some headway on integrating combatants into the army, yet deep constitutional disputes remained unresolved. By this time, the deadline to complete constitution was already extended 4 times, with Supreme Court ruling that no further extension would be allowed. Ultimately, on May 27, 2012, the assembly was dissolved and fresh elections were conducted. The Second Constituent Assembly, elected in 2013, was tasked with completing the work its predecessor had failed to do. A new constitution was finally promulgated in September 2015, following the devastating earthquake in April and May of 2015, which killed nearly 9,000 people and caused $7 billion in damages. This had forced country's largest party to fast-track the process so that they could focus on reconstruction from the natural calamity. This new constitution, while progressive in intent, had several major issues as many of the major points of contention remained unresolved. The new constitution divided Nepal into 7 provinces, ignoring the years of struggle by Maoist movement which demanded federal provincial structure for marginalized ethnic groups such as the Madhesi and Tharu groups, which occupied different parts of the country. Other issues included the unequal citizenship provisions for the children of Nepali mothers who married foreigners, dispute over parliamentary versus presidential form of government, and tensions around national identity due to secularism clause. But the most significant principle inadvertently fostered into the constitution was the political instability due to the structural design. Nepal adopted a mixed election system where 165 MPs were elected directly through first past the post system and the rest 110 through proportional representation, in which these seats were allocated based on overall share of votes that the parties received across the country to ensure inclusivity. However, it had led to many small parties getting seats, which make it hard for any one party to win a clear majority. As a result, governments were usually formed by coalitions. This initiated the next round of musical chairs of leadership. The first government was formed by UML faction of communists led by KP Sharma Oli in support with the Maoists. But this government collapsed in 2016 when Maoists withdrew the support over Oli's failure to implement federal restructuring and obstruct transitional justice for civil war victims from insurgency days. The Maoists then joined Nepali Congress under a power-sharing deal, with Prachanda becoming the first prime minister, who subsequently transferred premiership to Sher Bahadur Deuba of Nepali Congress in 2017. However, in 2018, the UML and Maoist faction of the Communist Party merged together to form the Nepal Communist Party to consolidate the leftist forces with an agreement to co-chair and rotate party premiership as well as the government leadership. This forced Nepali Congress out of power, bringing back Oli as the prime minister. But in a dramatic twist, Oli not only refused to rotate the premiership but also refused to share meaningful control over party's decision, sidelining Prachanda and centralizing power. This caused deep internal rifts, leading to widespread rebellion within the party and the parliament. To quench this rebellion, Oli dismissed the parliament twice, once in 2020 and once in 2021. However, in both instances, the Supreme Court intervened, reinstating the elected parliament. The crisis culminated in the court eventually invalidating the unification of the Nepal Communist Party and in May 2021 ordering the appointment of Sher Bahadur Deuba of Nepali Congress as the Prime Minister once again. Despite having the fewer number of seats after the 2022 elections, Maoists initially managed to form a government by securing the backing of the rival UML party, with Prachanda becoming the Prime Minister for the third time, surprisingly sidelining the Nepali Congress Party, who had won the majority of seats. However, this partnership quickly dissolved in 2023 due to a disagreement over the new president. In a swift change, Maoists then aligned with their former opponents in Nepali Congress, with Prachanda keeping the position as the Prime Minister. The political musical chair continued in 2024 when Nepali Congress and the UML came together in a dramatic new coalition. They pushed Prachanda out and agreed on a rotational power-sharing deal, with Oli leading the government for the first 2 years and then transferring power to Deuba in Nepali Congress, who would rule until the next election in 2027. While the political leaders were engaged in a musical chair of leadership, public frustration steadily grew. Between 2016 and 2024, Nepal's economic growth remained volatile, averaging around 4.5% annually, lower than the regional average. The COVID-19 pandemic fueled the crisis, shrinking GDP by nearly 2% in 2020 and exposing the fragility of Nepal's informal economy. Youth unemployment hovered over 20%, with 600,000 Nepalis leaving the country annually for a foreign employment. Remittances, though vital, contributing over 1 trillion Nepali rupee in 2023 alone, masked the lack of domestic job creation and industrial development. Infrastructure projects were stalled, inflation reached around 8%, and rural poverty deepened, especially in provinces like Karnali and Madhesh. Citizens increasingly viewed federalism as a failed promise, with local governments underfunded and underperforming. Simultaneously, a series of high-profile scandals began to surface, further eroding the public trust. The Lalita Niwas land scam involving senior leaders from Nepali Congress and the CPN-UML factions, including former ministers, exposed deep-rooted corruption in property dealings where ownerships of several properties were illegally transferred. The fake Bhutanese refugee scam involving close aides of former Home Minister shocked the nation, where innocent citizens were duped into paying large sums to be sent abroad under false identities with alleged involvement of political aides. The 100-kilogram gold smuggling case exposed collusion between custom official and political networks, with allegations reaching into the ruling coalition. Adding fuel to the public anger were the pictures of luxury lifestyle of politicians' children with designer brands, foreign vacations, and expensive cars, which circulated widely on social media. The contrast between elite privileges and mass hardship became a symbol of systematic inequality, fueling calls for reforms and accountability. All these scandals, failures, and betrayals stacked up over the years until patience of Nepal's young generation finally snapped. Gen Z, raised in a world of broken promises and endless political games, refused to stay silent. Clashes between demonstrators and security forces left at least 51 people dead and over 1,300 injured. Protesters stormed and set fire to government buildings and homes of politicians, with key leaders fleeing the country and military imposing curfew to restore order. Chief Justice Sushila Karki was appointed interim Prime Minister to restore order and oversee fresh elections. Gen Zs thus turned their frustration into a movement, stepping out of the digital world and into the streets. Their uprising was not just anger, it was a desperate call for dignity, justice, and the future they could believe in. And for the first time in decades, it was the youth and not the politicians who forced Nepal to confront its deepest wounds. If you found this story insightful, make sure to like this video and hit that subscribe button. And let us know in the comment section what story to unravel next.